Welcome to the first webinar in a two-part series on SAR snake habitat on farms. Farms provide a lot of great habitat for snakes. At the same time, snakes are beneficial to farms and their ecosystems. Both webinars are designed to help farmers have a positive impact on snake habitat. We will go over the new best available practices for helping snakes on your property. These practices are outlined in the provincial document, Best Management Practices for Identifying, Managing, and Creating Habitat for Species at Risk Snakes. This document was developed by Blazing Star Environmental in collaboration with Seaburn Ecological Services, G.G. Beck Ecological Consulting, and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry in 2018. These webinars are not meant to replace the document, but instead, we hope to make it more digestible to those without backgrounds in snake habitat. We also hope this presentation will help you navigate to the correct section of the BMP should you require it. Most importantly, we hope to inspire you to protect, create, or restore snake habitat on your property. This first webinar will focus on how to identify habitat for at-risk snake species and how to avoid or minimize impacts to this habitat while you farm. The second webinar will be next Tuesday at noon. I will touch on it at the end of this presentation. The webinar is being presented by Blazing Star Environmental and Totally Restored on behalf of the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. This webinar is funded through the Species at Risk Partnership on Agricultural Lands Program, or SARPAL, and delivered by the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. This program provides cost share opportunities for Ontario producers to implement best management practices, or BMPs, on their farms to protect all species at risk. It is funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Blazing Star Environmental was hired as species experts to develop and present the material, which we have done in collaboration with Totally Restored. Blazing Star Environmental is an ecological consulting firm based in Oshawa. Blazing Star is unique compared to other consulting firms in the sense that most of our work is focused on conservation and stewardship. We do a lot of ecological research and monitoring, and we specialize in species at risk, particularly reptiles and amphibians. We still do some traditional consulting work, like working with land development clients and performing environmental impact studies. We've worked with Ontario Soil and Crop on several projects related to improving habitat for species at risk on agricultural land, including developing BMPs and tools for use by farmers. Blazing Star Environmental Principal, Ori Urquhart, is the lead author of the Best Management Practices for Identifying, Managing, and Creating Habitat for Species at Risk Snakes that we will be talking about over the next hour. My name is Kayla Darling, and I am an ecologist at Blazing Star. Founded in 2021 by Michelle Hill, Totally Restored is a small restoration and habitat creation company that focuses on projects for Ontario's amphibians and reptiles. Michelle holds a Diploma of Technology for Renewable Resources in Fish, Wildlife and Recreation and a Bachelor of Science in Ecological Restoration from British Columbia Institute of Technology. She has completed the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Survey course, Ontario Wetland Evaluation System course, and has an excavator operator certification. Last year, she became a certified ecological restoration practitioner in training through the Society of Ecological Restoration and volunteers for the Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner Certification Committee. Michelle is attending the webinar today and will be presenting the second portion of the series on March 19th. All right, let's jump right in. First, we'll begin by explaining why you should care about snakes. A common misconception about snakes in Ontario is that they are dangerous and should be feared when, in fact, they present little to no danger when left alone. Snakes only become defensive when they feel threatened. Of all 15 snake species in Ontario, only one is venomous, and that is the Massasauga rattlesnake, which is pictured on the left. Massasaugas are small and notoriously shy. They would much rather retreat into the safety of dense vegetation than bite a human. They are also critically endangered in southern Ontario, with only 2 small protected populations. The majority of the Massasauga population is found in and around Georgian Bay. Snakes are also of no danger to livestock, as their defensive bite is harmless. Cattle within range of the Massasauga rattlesnake are at a low risk of being bitten. Even if an adult cow is bitten, its chances of dying are extremely low because the amount of venom per unit of the body is quite small. And as you may already know, snakes are extremely beneficial to people, especially farmers. Snakes contribute to healthy, functioning ecosystems that provide everyone with clean air, water, and soil as both predator and prey within the eco-food web. However, here are a few more benefits of snakes to farmers. Rodents can be very detrimental to crops by damaging plants or spoiling grain with feces and urine. This can be difficult to manage, and instead of using costly management solutions like poison and traps, it's simpler to encourage a cost-free natural predator like snakes to manage rodent populations. A fun fact for everyone, the milk snake was named as such because people believed that this snake was taking milk from cows, when in fact, milk snakes cannot actually drink milk and are only attracted to barns by the abundance of mice. In addition to mice, some snakes will also eat slugs, caterpillars, and other crop-eating pests. In addition to controlling pests, snakes also aid in disease control. Rodents are carriers of many diseases that are transferable to both humans and livestock. White-footed mice, for instance, are carriers of the Lyme bacterium and are a popular host of ticks, making them a major contributor to the spread of Lyme disease. Snakes are excellent predators and are extremely beneficial for controlling disease spread by rodent populations. Another benefit to having snakes around is that they contribute to seed dispersal. Cornell University study looked at seed ingestion and germination in preserved rattlesnakes and found that snakes can be important players in seed dispersal. This is how it works. Rodents store seeds in the pouches of their cheeks. When a snake preys upon this rodent, the seeds are then consumed by the snake. Seeds are kept intact throughout the snake's digestive system because snakes swallow their food whole, and since they are strict carnivores, they aren't able to digest cellulose and other components of the seeds. The study found that some of these seeds even germinated within the snake's colons. Snakes play an important role in food webs. Snakes control populations of the rodents, invertebrates, and amphibians they eat. They also provide an important food source to predators such as hawks, owls, and foxes. These species are also integral in management of rodent populations. Snake feces and uneaten parts of their prey's carcasses also act as soil fertilizers. As a result, snakes are essential for maintaining the flow of energy throughout the food web. Unfortunately, snakes in Ontario face a variety of threats. These include habitat loss and fragmentation, which is the one threat that all SAR snake species have in common. Transforming the natural environment to human land uses, such as urban development and agricultural development, has been detrimental to snake populations in Ontario. The constant pressure will only continue to limit ranges of at-risk snakes. Uninformed people often kill snakes because of their large size, fear, and misconceptions. For instance, the harmless gray rat snake, the largest snake in Canada, growing up to 2.5 meters, is often killed because people fear its large size. Not only are they persecuted, but often snakes are collected and sold for the illegal pet trade. Invasive species, such as Phragmites australis australis, or common reed, an invasive wetland plant, eliminate shallow water habitat when it forms dense stands, altering habitats for snakes that occupy wetlands. Phragmites also spreads easily between sites on vehicles and footwear. Disease is also affecting our at-risk snake species, including snake fungal disease, which has impacted several species in Ontario, including queen snakes and eastern fox snakes. Road effects also pose threats. Snakes face high road mortalities as they are difficult to see on the road and drivers may intentionally hit snakes. Roads also cause habitat fragmentation, and as a result, snakes may have to cross several as they can travel 2 to 3 kilometers for different habitat uses. Noise and light pollution from cars on highways can also easily disorient nearby snakes. Habitat loss and fragmentation is arguably the largest threat facing snakes in Ontario, particularly those in the southern part of the province. As farmers and private landowners, you have the unique opportunity to help SAR snakes in your own backyards. This map shows areas of human or anthropogenic land use in Ontario. The general legend on the right-hand side shows that a yellowish color represents agricultural land use, and red represents urban land use. You can see that there is very little habitat that isn't anthropogenic left in southwestern Ontario, and that which remains is very small and heavily fragmented. These small remaining habitat patches are sometimes not large enough to support a healthy wildlife population. This is especially problematic for Ontario's reptiles and amphibians, as many species are restricted to southwestern Ontario. Right, now let's discuss our species at risk snakes. All right, so first let's discuss what a species at risk, or SAR, is. A species at risk, or SAR, is a wildlife species that is in danger of disappearing from the wild. There are 4 classifications for species at risk in Ontario. The first is special concern, a native species that may become endangered or threatened due to a combination of biological characteristics and identified threats, meaning that this species is sensitive to human activities and/or natural events. An example of one would be the monarch butterfly, which I'm sure we are all very familiar with. The next is threatened, a native species that may become endangered if proper action is not taken. An example of this would be the eastern hognose snake, which is one of Ontario's native snake species. Finally, we have endangered, a native species that may become extirpated or extinct if proper action is not taken. An example of this would be the little brown bat. And finally, we have extirpated, which means no longer exists in the wild in Ontario, but can be found elsewhere, such as the timber rattlesnake, which once existed in Ontario, but now can be found in the eastern United States. The Committee on the Status of Species at Risk in Ontario evaluates the status of wildlife species in Ontario. It is important to note that the species shown here are represented based on the provincial listing. Their federal status may be different. This is true for all species. For example, the monarch butterfly is listed as a species of special concern in Ontario. However, in Canada, it is listed as endangered. There are 15 species of snakes in Ontario and one extirpated species, the timber rattlesnake, which we discussed in the previous slide. Of these 15, 9 species or subspecies are currently listed as species at risk or SAR. This section will cover brief species descriptions, statuses, and distributions. You can look at the range maps displayed on the following slides to determine which species are found in your area. There are arrows indicating key ID features for each snake. To learn more about these species, please visit the Ontario Nature, Reptile and Amphibious Atlas website, which can be found on the bottom of the slide. The northern ribbon snake looks very similar to the eastern garter snake and Butler's garter snake, but can be differentiated by a white crescent in front of its eye. This species lives in wetland environments. The maps on each of the following slides indicate species distribution in Ontario. Green squares represent observations before and after 2018, yellow squares represent observations up until 1999, and red squares represent observations only before 1999. Named for its upturned snout, the eastern hognose snake is unmistakable and the only snake species in Ontario to have a nose like this. Its coloration and patterning is highly variable, and it can range in color from brown to gray to yellow or to olive. The pattern can also include blotches all over its body or no pattern at all. Unique defensive displays that include flattening its neck to look like a cobra, hissing, and striking with a closed mouth, as well as a last resort where it will play dead by turning onto its back and remaining motionless. Eastern hognose snakes are unique in that they prefer sandy dune-like habitats for breeding and are otherwise indistinct in their habitat use. Widely distributed in Ontario and rarely seen, if you do see one, be sure to report it. The eastern fox snake is the third largest snake in Ontario and can grow to 1.7 meters in length. It is yellow to light brown in color with dark blotches all over its body. It has an orange-colored head with dark bars near the eyes and a yellow chin, and has a checkered patterned belly. It can often be found in trees as they are one of 2 snake species in Ontario that are arboreal. The Massasauga rattlesnake is the only rattlesnake in Ontario. It is considered a pygmy or small rattlesnake as it only reaches 60 to 75 centimeters in length. It is brown to gray in color with butterfly or saddle-shaped blotches down its back and smaller blotches on its sides. It has a vertical pupil, triangular head, unlike other snakes in Ontario. It is easily identified by its rattle, however, the rattles can break off. Habitat generalists and can be found in many meadows, shoreline habitats, wetlands, forests, rock barrens, old fields, and grasslands. There are only 2 populations in Ontario. The Carolinian population is currently listed as endangered and is only really found in several locations, while the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence population is currently listed as threatened. As you can see on the map, their current range is limited to mostly eastern Georgian Bay and the Bruce Peninsula. Queen snakes can be identified by 3 dark stripes that run down their back and a distinctive yellow stripe along the lower side of their body. They are found near streams where they can be seen basking on rocks or in shrubs and trees near water. Queen snakes are prey specialists in that crayfish is their preferred food source. Butler's garter snakes look very similar to the common eastern garter snake or even the northern ribbon snake. The only way to tell the difference is the location of the stripes on its side. On Butler's garter snakes, these lateral stripes are centered on the 3rd scale row. However, these snakes are found in only a small number of habitats in southwestern Ontario, so unless you are located in these areas, chances are it's an eastern garter snake. The gray rat snake is the largest snake in Ontario and can grow up to 2.5 meters in length. They live in forests and wooded areas, but spend parts of their summers in old fields and meadows. They are excellent climbers and can be found mainly in trees. The Lake Erie water snake is a subspecies of the common northern water snake. They are found only on Pelee Island and other western Lake Erie islands. The blue racer is named for its bluish-gray body color and speed, as it can travel up to 7 kilometers an hour. Today, it is only found on Pelee Island, but historically it was also found on the mainland in southern Ontario. The eastern milk snake is not a species at risk in Ontario. However, it is listed federally as a species of special concern. It is found widespread throughout southern Ontario, and is often found in the foundations of old farmhouses or other underground structures. It is an excellent species to have around, as they typically hunt a variety of different rodents. Determining which species are present on your property can be difficult, as snakes are very cryptic, and even if you haven't seen any of these species on your property, that doesn't mean that they aren't there. A great place to start is by checking the range maps that we just went over on the species slide to narrow down possible species. The Ontario Nature Reptile and Amphibian Atlas is a great resource that includes up-to-date interactive maps of species records across the province. The website is freely available to anyone with internet access. The map looks like this, the one on the slide, and could be found at this link. Using the drop-down menu, you can select each of the snake species in Ontario and determine if there are any records of these species in your area. Green squares indicate records before and after 2018, yellow squares indicate records only after 1999, and red squares indicate records only before 1999. It is important to note that even an absence of species records in your area does not mean an absence of that species. However, if there is a recent record of a species at risk on your property, green or yellow square, and suitable habitat is available, then it is likely that that species is present. Note that this platform provides species occurrence information on a coarse scale, or a 10 by 10 kilometer scale, so it can only provide insight into whether a species has been observed within 10 kilometers of your farm. However, we have another tool which may be helpful, which we will be launching very shortly, also known as the Habitat and Biodiversity Assessment Tool. Blazing Star Environmental is currently working with Ontario Soil and Crop and the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association to develop an online interactive tool that will help farmers determine which SAR, including snakes, are most likely to occur on their property, along with stewardship opportunities to improve habitat for those species. This tool is in the testing stage and is nearly ready. Please reach out if you're interested in learning more about this tool or if you'd like to participate in its testing. While HBAT, as we like to call it, is currently in its testing phase, it will eventually be able to help producers identify and implement specific conservation actions for species at risk on and around their properties. In 2018, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry produced a document entitled Best Management Practices for Identifying, Managing, and Creating Habitat for Ontario Species at Risk Snakes. The principal of Blazing Star Environmental, Ori Urquhart, was the lead author of this document. The next few slides will review the purpose, limitations, and the layout of this document. Most of the content for the rest of this webinar comes from the BMP guide, and there is reference pages to this document at the bottom of the slides, so you can refer to them for more information if needed. The purpose of this document is to assist with the protection and recovery of Ontario's at-risk snake species. It aims to provide guidance on snake habitat identification, habitat impact avoidance and mitigation, and habitat creation and restoration. It also aims to provide necessary information for individuals undertaking activities within or adjacent to at-risk snake habitat to be able to comply with the Endangered Species Act. The practices outlined in this document are based on the best available information. However, we still lack a lot of information on the effectiveness of recommended approaches. Applying these practices to an experimental framework is essential to improving our understanding of snake habitat creation and management techniques. This webinar will cover the first 4 sections of the BMP. The introduction, the Ontario species at risk snakes and their habitat, which we've already talked about, habitat identification, and avoiding and minimizing adverse effects to SAR snake habitat. There will be another webinar, part 2 in this 2-part series, on sections 5, which covers habitat creation, restoration, and maintenance, and section 6, the effectiveness monitoring of habitat management activities. The next webinar will be presented next Tuesday, March 14th at 12 p.m. and we'll focus on teaching you how to create all the habitat types that will be discussed in today's webinar. In order to protect snake species at risk, we must protect their habitat. To do that, we must know what their habitat is and what types of habitat snakes use. The Endangered Species Act defines habitat as, with respect to a species of animal, plant, or other organism for which a regulation made under Clause 56 is enforced, the area prescribed by that regulation as the habitat of the species, or, with respect to any other species of animal, plant, or other organism, an area on which the species depends directly or indirectly to carry on its life processes, including life processes such as reproduction, rearing, hibernation, migration, or feeding. Snake habitats can be divided into 5 categories based on what snakes use them for. We will go through each of these critical habitat types individually and discuss important features of each of these habitats. Habitats for snakes include hibernation, nesting, gestation and birthing, basking and foraging, and movement. In Ontario, snakes hibernate and spend their winter underground in hibernacula, or hibernaculum for singular. Hibernation period begins in September, October, or early November and lasts until April or early May, depending on the species, seasonal weather variation, and latitude. Hibernation habitat is limited on the landscape and is crucial to the survival of these species. Most snakes, such as the eastern fox snake, hibernate communally. A single hibernacula can contain dozens or even hundreds of snakes. Many hibernacula house several different species of snakes. Snakes overwinter in a variety of habitat features, including talus slopes, rock crevices, animal burrows, building foundations, crayfish burrows, root cavities, and mounds, wells, and cisterns. In the photo on the left, you can see an eastern fox snake basking next to a crated hibernaculum. Can you see it? It's right there. Not all underground cavities are suitable for overwintering. There are some important microhabitat characteristics that hibernacula must have in order for snakes to survive the winter. This diagram depicts the hypothetical life zone model. Life zone is the area where snakes can hibernate successfully. It is the area between the frost line and the water table that provides sufficient oxygen. It is important that snakes hibernate below the frost line so that they do not freeze, and above the water table so that they do not get flooded out or drown. The size of the life zone can vary depending on the topography, soil type, drainage, vegetation cover, and other environmental factors. It also changes regularly over the winter as precipitation and snowmelt occur, so it has to withstand fluctuation. Snakes in Ontario are either ovoviviparous, eggs hatch inside females and they give birth to live young, or oviparous, they lay eggs. Egg-laying snakes, which are blue racers, eastern fox snakes, eastern hognose snakes, which have the eggs pictured, and gray rat snakes, typically select nesting sites in open habitats that receive full sun for most of the day. This is in order to incubate their eggs between 24 to 36 degrees Celsius. Higher nest temperatures result in shorter incubation periods for snakes, which increases hatchling survivorship because it allows them to have more time to forage before first hibernation. Snakes typically nest between mid-June and late July, and hatching typically occurs from late August until mid-October. This can vary based on latitude and weather conditions. Nesting sites can include rotting stumps, hollow trees, cavities under piles of rocks or vegetation, mammal burrows, compost piles, and brush piles. Live-bearing snakes like Butler's garter snake, eastern ribbon snake, Lake Erie water snake, the Massasauga, and queen snakes use specialized habitat known as gestation sites. Gravid, or pregnant females, choose gestation sites that are open with minimal canopy cover that allows them to regulate their body temperature and incubate the eggs that they carry inside them until they are hatched. It is important that these gestation sites also provide gravid females with their shelter and cover from predation. Gestation sites can include rock and log piles, mammal burrows, brush piles, low-lying vegetation, beaver lodges, boards, and scrap metal. Gravid females will move to their gestation sites shortly after emerging from hibernation and remain there until they can give birth in late summer. Unlike mammals, snakes are ectothermic, meaning that they cannot regulate their own body temperature and rely on the sun to keep them warm. Therefore, snakes alter their behavior and habitat use in order to maintain an optimal temperature between 25 to 34 degrees Celsius. To thermoregulate, snakes prefer open and edge habitats with enough complexity to offer them shelter from high temperatures and predators. Snakes increase their body temperature by basking in sunny areas. Snakes reduce their temperature or avoid predation by retreating into dense vegetation under rocks or underground. Naturally occurring basking sites include rock barrens, forest clearings, fields, brush piles, rock piles, meadows, forest edges, and shorelines for semi-aquatic and wetlands. Snakes will also use human-made features such as wood piles, barns, hedgerows, and retaining walls, and snakes bask mainly in the springtime when the air temperature is cooler. In the summer, they bask less as ambient temperature is at or near optimal body temperature. Depending on their food preferences, snakes forage in a variety of habitats. However, they will typically look for food in open and edge habitats where they can also thermoregulate. Examples of species-specific forage and thermoregulation habitat include old fields and meadows for Butler's garter snakes, river shorelines for queen snakes, and savanna habitats for blue racers. Depending on the species, snake home range sizes can be several kilometers. Snakes will travel to find food, mates, and suitable habitat. Seasonal movement patterns include spring and fall migration between hibernacula and summer habitat, movements by males during mating periods, movements by females during gestation and nesting periods. Snakes move through a variety of habitats that they would otherwise not use, such as a closed canopy forest, open water, sand dunes, hedgerows, and drainage ditches. However, snakes will avoid very open habitats with no cover that put them at risk of predation. Snakes shed multiple times per year. This process can take several days to complete. During this time, snakes are vulnerable to predation because they have restricted mobility and their eyesight is impaired. This is caused by the scale on their eyes shedding as well. During the shedding period, snakes use habitats that will allow them to thermoregulate under cover while providing protection from predators. This is often cooler than their optimal body temperature, but offers greater protection, for example, in a deeper rock pile. Basking sites are very similar to the type of habitat used for shedding and provide similar conditions. So habitat where snakes like to bask, such as barns, brush piles, and rock piles, also provides suitable shedding habitat. Now that you know the type of habitats that snakes use, let's discuss how to determine which ones might be present on your farm. How do you know if habitat is being used by snakes? Well, you can start by visually searching for snakes to determine if species are using important habitats on your property. It is important that these surveys are carried out at the right times of year. For example, to determine if species at risk are overwintering on your property, searching in and around hibernacula, like rock crevices, foundations, and animal burrows, in the early spring may reveal the presence of snakes. Generally cryptic and subterranean nature of some of these habitats make them tricky to identify, even for reptile experts. Also, the short window in which snakes spend time at these habitats adds to the difficulty in identifying them. If you would like to conduct your own visual survey to determine if there is a species at risk snake habitat on your property, you would do so by walking through the habitat and visually searching for species of interest. This is known as a visual encounter survey. Using certain tools, such as binoculars, to scan habitat features before approaching them so as not to spook any snakes, or snake hooks/sticks to poke around in areas where you cannot see, this is especially important in Massasauga habitat, are useful when conducting these surveys. Looking under cover, such as flipping rocks, logs, or wooden boards, is a great way to find snakes. If you are in rattlesnake territory, use caution and do not put your hands where you cannot see them. Remember that methodology, timing, and search effort are all important factors to consider when conducting a visual encounter survey. Another way to identify if snakes are using habitat on your property is to find evidence of their presence. This includes shed skin, eggs or egg fragments, or road-killed individuals. Shed skin and egg fragments are most likely to be found in their respective shedding and nesting habitats, such as brush piles, compost piles, rock piles, or rotten logs. Field surveys conducted by reptile experts may be necessary to determine the presence of particular at-risk snakes on your property. Now that you know how to identify snake habitat within the agricultural landscape, I'm going to go over how you can take simple steps to avoid negatively impacting this habitat. Habitat can be damaged or destroyed to the point where it can no longer effectively support a snake's life processes. This can be incredibly harmful for snakes and cause them to have to locate to new habitat. If new habitat cannot be found, it could lead to mortalities. Negative effects can usually be avoided through proper planning, especially if a reptile expert is involved in the planning. Activities that may alter SAR snake habitat may need to be authorized under the Endangered Species Act. I'm now going to provide recommendations that will minimize or eliminate your potential effect on at-risk snake habitat. As we know, habitat loss and fragmentation are the greatest threats to Ontario's snakes. Therefore, it is really important that we avoid destroying or damaging habitat further. Some snake habitat is actually legally protected under the Endangered Species Act. Section 10 of the ESA prohibits the damage or destruction of habitat of a threatened or endangered species. However, not all activities that alter habitat are damaging to snakes. As stated in the BMP document, habitat is only considered to be damaged if it impairs or eliminates the function of the habitat for supporting one or more of the species' life processes. Alterations may actually be positive. For example, adding rock piles next to a hibernacula to provide basking and shedding habitat. However, many activities are damaging and require proper planning. Some snake habitat is very sensitive to alteration, while other types of habitats are more resilient to disturbance. Under the ESA, habitats have been categorized based on the snake's anticipated level of tolerance to alteration of that habitat. Category 1 includes highly sensitive habitats that have the lowest tolerance to change, including hibernation, gestation, and nesting sites. These habitats are listed as Category 1 because they require very specific microhabitat features that are often rare on the landscape, and therefore snakes are highly dependent on them. Hibernacula, in particular, are the most sensitive habitat type. Snakes tend to go back to the same hibernation site year after year. If a hibernaculum is destroyed, individuals may perish in winter temps if they are not able to find new habitat. Furthermore, snake species that hibernate communally in groups of hundreds or of individuals are at risk of local extirpations if one hibernaculum is destroyed. Category 2 includes habitat that is less sensitive and more tolerant to change relative to Category 1 habitat. Habitat types in this category include thermoregulation, for example basking sites, and foraging sites. Snakes spend most of their active season in these habitats. These habitats are listed as Category 2 because they are more abundant across the landscape and easier to create than habitats in Category 1. Category 3 includes habitat that has the highest tolerance to change. These habitats include movement corridors and edge habitat. Snakes can move through a variety of habitat types and therefore can adapt more easily if the habitat is damaged or destroyed. Therefore, some activities that would alter or damage movement corridors may not impair habitat functions for species at risk snakes. This diagram illustrates how eastern fox snake habitat is legally protected under these three categories. As you can see in this case, only a small portion of the overall habitat is identified as Category 1. It includes a 30-meter buffer around the location of egg laying. Category 2 habitat includes all areas within 1,500 meters that is suitable for foraging. Notice the hedgerows, linear water features, and forests. All other natural area located within 1,500 meters is Category 3 and used for movement. As you can see, most of the area is Category 3 and has a high tolerance to alteration. Therefore, if you do have a species at risk snake habitat on your property, only a small area is typically sensitive to alteration. This is important to understand when planning land use changes that will change the habitat on your property. These buffers differ for each species at risk snake based on their biology. They can be found online, and please get in touch if you're looking for more information. That being said, it is important to implement certain practices and plan projects to avoid harm to the most sensitive SAR habitat. Although the following recommendations should be considered on a case-by-case basis, there are generally effective methods for avoiding harm to SAR snake habitat. The best way to avoid negatively impacting snakes is to relocate the project to an area that snakes are not using. For example, carrying out your project in a section of retired cash crop field like soy or corn is unlikely to affect SAR snakes because they don't typically use this open monoculture habitat. It is important to consider indirect effects of actions as well. For example, building a structure next to snake thermoregulation sites would impede the functionality of the habitat by shading it, even if the footprint of the structure is not actually located in the habitat. Consider the sensitivity of the habitat that you would like to work in, remember the three categories, and carry out any projects in areas that are least sensitive to alteration. If an activity only has short-term effects, Project activities should be conducted during a time of year when the habitat is not being used. For example, carry out activities that could affect the water table of a hibernaculum during the summer when snakes aren't underground hibernating. Note, if the water table is altered, it should be returned to the level it was before the project was implemented by the time the snakes are ready to overwinter. This chart displays the times of year when it is and isn't okay to carry out short-term activities in the vicinity of snake habitat. It is best to avoid activity in important habitats during the time of year when snakes are using these habitats. This is indicated in the second column. The third column indicates the non-active periods for snakes in each habitat type and when it would be appropriate to carry out these activities. Hibernacula are very sensitive to a variety of changes because they have specific attributes below ground and above ground that need to be there for snakes to hibernate successfully. Even impacts that occur a fair distance from the overwintering site, for example, changes to the water table, can have damaging effects. These recommendations can help you avoid any adverse effects to hibernation habitat. You should avoid activities that will affect the underground structure of hibernacula. This includes activities like blasting and excavation and the use of heavy machinery that compact the earth and collapse underground chambers. Avoid activities that will affect the surface structure and habitat composition of the area, such as clearing shrubs that are used for cover when emerging. Avoid any activities that would affect the water table and surface/subsurface drainage, including activities like ditches and installing tile beds and long-term effects activities such as clear cutting. Avoid any changes to the habitat that would make it more prone to human disturbance, such as creating public hiking and ATV trails close to the hibernacula. Should also avoid constructing roads altogether in this habitat to avoid mortality of snakes. This does include small access roads, and ideally, roads should only be constructed if they are far enough away to not cause chemical, light, or sound pollution. It might also be important to consider vibrations from equipment and vehicles in the area. Gestation and nesting sites are particularly sensitive to disturbance. With proper project planning, adverse effects to these habitats can be avoided. Avoid activities that would reduce sun exposure in this area, such as planting trees and shrubs or building a structure next to this type of habitat. This is important because snakes require sun to regulate their own temperature and to incubate their eggs. Maintain or restore any naturally occurring cover objects, such as logs and rock piles. These are important features used for basking and hiding. Avoid mowing and herbicide application that will remove important ground vegetation or low-lying shrubs. Snakes require this cover to escape from predators when gestating. At nesting sites, avoid disrupting nesting materials such as burning brush piles until after nesting period is finished, or wait until at least late September. Avoid any changes to the habitat that would make it more prone to human disturbance, such as creating public hiking and ATV trails. Avoid constructing roads altogether in this habitat. Avoid creating any barriers, such as solid fencing and retaining walls, that would prevent snakes from accessing these habitats. Snakes have a moderate tolerance to any changes in their thermoregulation and foraging habitats. By following these recommendations, it is possible to carry out activities in these habitats without adversely affecting them. Since sun exposure is important in thermoregulation habitats, avoid increasing canopy cover by not planting lots of trees and shrubs in the area. Maintain or restore any naturally occurring cover objects, such as logs, rock piles, and brush piles. Avoid removing any ground vegetation or low-lying shrubs by refraining from moving or applying herbicides. Avoid constructing large structures, such as houses and barns in these areas. Small-scale construction projects may not affect these habitats, but it will depend on the project specifics. Avoid creating any barriers, such as solid fencing and retaining walls, that would prevent snakes from accessing these habitats. If these fences or wall features are necessary, modify them to allow snake movement. For example, create passageways for snakes along the bottom of the structure or build fences 30 centimeters off the ground. Any activities that will impair the movement of snakes will adversely affect movement habitat. While some activities in this type of habitat may not have an effect, large-scale changes in land cover within movement habitat can be acceptable if they do not impede or prevent the movement of species at-risk snakes through them. By following these recommendations, it is possible to carry out activities in these habitats without adversely affecting movement habitat. You should avoid creating solid barriers such as retaining walls, as well as avoid creating open areas that are unsafe for snake movement, such as parking lots and tilled fields. Snakes are vulnerable to predators in open areas that don't have cover objects or refuge, so are less likely to use them. Avoid removing hedgerows as they are often used for movement by snakes. Maintain or restore any naturally occurring cover objects, such as rocks, logs, and brush piles. Avoid removing any ground vegetation or low-lying shrubs by mowing or applying herbicides. Avoid constructing major roads in this habitat, such as highways and concessions. We have now reached the end of the webinar. The following slide will summarize some key takeaways from this presentation. To summarize, snakes are beneficial on farms. Ontario at-risk snakes and their habitat are protected by law. Before project implementation, it is important to determine if species at-risk snakes and their habitat are present on your property. However, many activities can occur within and near protected habitat if done so following the recommendations provided in the BMP. Project planning will prevent or limit any adverse effects to their habitat. Prioritize protection efforts on Category 1 habitat. Snakes need your help and protection. If you would like a copy of the BMP, please reach out to myself or Michelle via the emails we will provide at the end of this presentation. If you would like to learn some practical techniques to establishing snake habitat on your farm, please consider registering for our snake habitat course. Course registration will open later this year and will take place in early fall. It'll teach practical skills for topics discussed in this and next week's webinar. Please email training@blazingstar.ca to get notified for when registration has opened. As previously stated, the second part of this webinar series will focus on creating, restoring, and monitoring snake habitat on the farm. This will be presented on Thursday, March 14th, 2024 from 12 to 1. There are still spots, so make sure you register. Thank you very much. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.